Nice to see everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Barbara Paxton. I'm the director of BoardStrong. This is our introduction to nonprofit board service. I'm joined by Malik Diamande, who is our community outreach coordinator and also a tech guy extraordinaire. So he'll be making sure that everything runs smoothly. First, a few housekeeping rules. You'll notice that we are being recorded. So thank you for that. You'll also hear that I have a bit of a cold. I apologize, but I think I should make it through this okay. And then finally, please feel free as we go through this to put your questions into the chat. We'll try to answer some of them if they arise and leave some time at the end as well. So let's get started. What are we going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about us. Then we're going to talk about joining a nonprofit board, why you should want to do that, why it's a good thing. Then we're going to go through some basics. What does it mean to be on a nonprofit board? It's hard work. What is expected of you? Then how you might find a board if you don't have one that you already have in mind wanting to be on. And then finally, some time for questions and answers. So let's start here. BoardStrong, we're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to advance the nonprofit sector and the impact of nonprofits by supporting the achievement of the highest standards of board leadership. Essentially, we believe that good boards result in good organizations, and that means good services to our communities. We are very interested in helping to recruit board members, to train them. We do consultation, we have educational resources, and we'll talk a little bit at the end. We have a board recruitment platform which connects organizations and candidates to people outside their networks. We are an affiliate of the New York Council of Nonprofits, and I'm happy to say we're joined today by George Ferrari, who's actually on the board of NICON. So thank you for your board support. Good modeling. All right, let's start with why join a nonprofit board. Well, what are nonprofits? They're organizations dedicated to furthering a social cause, advocating for a shared point of view. They have a mission. Essentially, when you join the board of a nonprofit organization, you take on the role to help create some of society's most important benefits, right? You know that some of our most important causes, things that make our lives pleasant, things that really help people. Smattering of an example right there. They're saving the animals, helping the unhoused, after-school co-programming, kids programming, arts, dance, music, plethora. We're in the state of New York right here. A lot of this is going to talk about the state of New York, though everything that we talk about really applies anywhere, everywhere. Here, hospitals, healthcare centers are also nonprofit organizations. So really advancing some of the greatest causes in our society. So why should you want to join a nonprofit board? Besides the fact that it is really a great thing to do? Well, I mean, first of all, you get the satisfaction of giving back to your community, making a difference to a cause that's important to you. You'll get to meet people that you otherwise wouldn't meet, maybe. We are so siloed in where we live and what we do in our professions, and nonprofit organizations give you a chance to really break out of that and have a feeling of personal enrichment, right? You really learn about the community that you live in by serving the people who live and work there. Professionally, it could also be very useful, right? First off, you can help fulfill corporate citizenship, meaning that the organization that you work for is seen to be out in the community doing good. You're representing them, right? It can help you with networking with other corporate and community leaders, help you expand your professional skills and knowledge, and learn leadership responsibilities or improve your leadership responsibilities if you don't already have them. And just a little recognition. People generally admire people who serve on nonprofit boards. Sorry. Basically, when you join a nonprofit board, it really helps you see how you can make an impact pretty immediately, right? You develop a broader understanding of what works and doesn't work, right? Boards are generally like 10 to 15 people. You're part of a small but mighty group of individuals making a big impact, right? You can see how your advice, support, oversight lead to the success and the social impact of the organization pretty quickly and pretty directly. And no other volunteer experience really provides the opportunity to have as significant an impact on an organization or the mission as being on a nonprofit board. So it can be challenging, but incredibly fulfilling. And I'm glad you're here to learn more about it. So let's go through some basics of what it means to be on a nonprofit board. Right? Well, first, let's start with what is a nonprofit. A nonprofit is an organization that has a mission. It's defined by its mission, right? Finds its purpose for stakeholders who it wants to support. Right? At some point, a group of people got together to do something, to advance a cause, to put on a play or whatever. And that was the mission of the organization. How is that different from the for-profit world, where if you have a company that makes money and you want to do something else to change that, you can do that pretty easily. But you can't do that in the nonprofit world. It's a board member, nonprofits are public trusts. People give them money, funds, resources to fulfill their mission, and they have to be faithful to carrying it out. And that's probably the highest duty of a nonprofit board, is to ensure that the resources organization has are in furtherance of the mission that it supports, and that those programs are excellent, impactful, and again, fulfilling the mission. What does it mean to be a board member? Well, you'll be asked to give a lot. We're asked to give your time, your expertise, right? Bring yourself, your training, your opinions to bear. Bring your perspectives as a member of a community or constituent. Just being there gives some credibility to the organization, right? You, an honorable person with decent networks, being on the board means that it's a good place to be. We want board members to bring their influence, their connections, their resources, like money, but also access to people who might help us, individuals or companies that might move us forward. And then finally, where we're going to focus first is we ask board members to make sure that you bring a commitment to excellence, to the programming, and in governance. And that involves the duties of care, obedience, and loyalty. And we'll get to those in a moment. So let's talk a little bit about government oversight of nonprofit organizations. As I mentioned, we're in New York, but this is pretty similar for every other state that has in the country, in the United States, right? Nonprofits are regulated by the federal government and by local state governments. So the federal government, primarily the Internal Revenue Service, is responsible for blessing or proving the charitable purpose of the nonprofit, right? Educational, religious, artistic, etc., and ensuring that contributions to it are tax deductible. That's important. Those nonprofits are called 501c3s under the IRS statute. There's actually 29 different types of nonprofits, all 501c organizations, but not all of them are charitable, and not all of them can accept charitable contributions. You think about clubs, business associations, alumni associations. These are all nonprofit organizations, but they're not charitable institutions. The other one that you may be familiar with is a 501c4, and that's an organization that's dedicated to lobbying and advocating for a cause. That's also a nonprofit, but also cannot accept tax-deductible contributions. So for the IRS, every organization must file what's called a Form 990. It's financial disclosure every single year. As a board member, you'll be responsible for reviewing that document annually and making sure that it's filed. That's really important, not only because if you don't file it, you'll lose your tax status after 3 years, but also because it's a really important marketing document. 990s are available on the internet, just about everywhere, on the IRS website, on ProPublica's website. Google an organization and 990, you can easily find its Form 990. So that is useful when you're looking at joining a nonprofit board, but also a really good thing to remember that everyone will be able to see it and know. Again, nonprofits are a public trust. Transparency is important. Most states have their own nonprofit laws and their own regulators. Here in New York, we have the not-for-profit corporation law, and nonprofits are regulated by the Attorney General of the state of New York, right? Additionally, so in addition to that 990, every nonprofit here must file annually what's called a Char 500. Again, it's another form. It's basically just 4 pages together with the 990. But again, it's important to do that to maintain the tax-deductible nonprofit status of the organization. Not every state requires a separate form. For example, if you are in North Carolina, right, there's just a basic form, but you do have to annually submit the 990 with the state. So really ensuring that your tax deducted, that your charitable status is kept up to date is a really important thing. So let's talk about those duties that I mentioned earlier, the duties of a fiduciary, right? What is a fiduciary? Well, it's someone who acts for someone else's benefit. It's technical and responsible in connection with the administration, investment, and distribution of someone else's assets. What that means, again, is nonprofits are a public trust. Corporations, government, people invest money in them in furtherance so that they can do good work, what their mission is. And it's the board's responsibility to ensure that that's happening. That's our governance and oversight responsibilities. So these happen to be written into New York state law, but they're best practices and pretty much a requirement everywhere if you're going to join a nonprofit board. What's the first? The first is what we call the duty of care. Degree of competence and care expected to advance the mission and avoid reasonably foreseeable harm. What this really means, it's called the reasonable person's duty. It means that you need to bring your brain and your time and your effort to being a board member and to make sure that you spend as much time and energy as necessary to understand what the organization does, what matters require your attention, and most importantly, you need to be familiar enough with the organization to understand the decisions that you're being asked to make, right? As a board member, you'll be asked to make decisions about budgets and strategy and relationships. And as a board member, you need to show up and make sure that you understand what is going on and what those decisions are. What's the best way to help fulfill this responsibility? Well, make sure that you attend meetings, right? You find out if you want to be a board, make sure you find out when the meetings are, how often they are, that you can attend all of them. In board meetings, you need to pay attention. You need to be prepared for them, actively participate. When you get a board packet a week ahead of time that has finances and minutes and program reports, make sure you read them before the board meeting so you can come in prepared and ask questions. Challenge what you don't think is correct. Don't let groupthink occur in the organization. Sorry. And then finally, you need to understand the finances and the budget. It is tempting sometimes to say, oh, well, there's some bankers or some finance people on this board, and I'm not one of them, so I don't have to understand the finances. In fact, every board member has to understand the finances of the organization. Maybe not to technical detail, but you need to know where money is coming from, how you're raising it, and how the organization is spending it in furtherance of the mission. That is the responsibility of every board member. Next, fiduciary responsibility is the duty of loyalty. And that requires that a nonprofit board member act in the best interest of the organization at all times, right? We don't want our board members to benefit financially from being on the board, right? You want to make decisions in the best interest of the mission, in the best interest of the nonprofit, without being compromised by private gain or any other interests or having family gain, et cetera, et cetera. So what do we want? We want board members to disclose any conflict of interest as they arise, make sure people know about it. There's nothing wrong with actually having conflicts of interest, right? You can have a friend who wants to do business with your organization that you think would do a really good job for them, or a relative who has a venue, maybe wants to donate it for an event or something. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that you have to make sure that you disclose that kind of thing and make sure that you're not trying to influence the decision in any way. You take yourself out of the decision-making process when the time comes to make decisions. So disclose conflict of interest. Here in the state of New York, every year, we have to sign an annual conflict of interest disclosure form, right? But if you have a conflict of interest, don't wait until that form comes around. Just blurt it out. That's part of your responsibilities. Then the other duty of loyalty is, of course, loyalty and faithfulness to the organization, right? You want to be publicly supportive of the organization, even if there's a board meeting or something and something is going on and you're not particularly in agreement with it, but the rest of the board is, you can have conversations inside the boardroom, but publicly you are a cheerleader and an ambassador for the organization out there in the world. Finally, we have the duty of obedience. Yes, and there's two parts of this. One is it's the board's responsibility to ensure that the organization is compliant with laws and is faithful to its own documents. That's the bylaws, certificate of incorporation, et cetera, and then board decisions and policies. So I mentioned nonprofits have their own nonprofit law in many states, but they're responsible for complying with all other laws as well, right? Non-discrimination, workplace safety, any laws that might pertain specifically to what they do. So the nonprofit board is responsible for making sure that that happens. Now, does that mean that you have to go into the office, read the law, really, take that responsibility on yourselves? Not really. But what it does mean is that you have to know enough about the leadership and the processes of the organization that you're on the board of so that you have confidence that things are being done as they should be, right? Who's responsible for what? How are things being approved? How do we know that things are happening that should be happening? Next, the organization has bylaws. We'll get into that a little bit more, but those are the governing documents of the organization. And you want to make sure that the board is acting in compliance with its own bylaws. Certificate of incorporation, charter, again, that has to do with your mission. What did you say your mission? What did the organization say its mission was when it became a nonprofit organization? Is it staying true to that? And then finally, the duty of obedience also requires you to make sure that any monies that are contributed to the organizations are spent on the activities specified by the people who gave them. We are very, again, funds entrusted to the organization in furtherance of the mission. It's your highest duty. Finally, the duty of obedience is also the duty of obedience to each other as board members, right? So you want to make sure that you understand and support the duly made decisions of the board and maintain the confidentiality of board discussions. As I said, you can have challenging conversations in the boardroom, challenging conversations, ask questions, but once decisions are made, you need to support the organization and the board that you're a part of. Going. So, are there risks to being on the board? Yes, there's risks to everything. They're not so great, but that you can get into trouble. How do board members tend to get into trouble? What do we see? Well, again, neglect of those fiduciary responsibilities. If the board is asleep at the wheel, people aren't showing up to meetings, et cetera, that can be an issue. Slander, libel, again, walking out of a boardroom that you've lost a vote and saying not nice things about your fellow board members can tend to get board members in trouble. Violations of law, including employment-related claims. We encourage board members not to really get involved in the supervision of employees because discrimination is one of those things that you can get in trouble for. And then unpaid payroll, et cetera. You probably heard about that. When organizations get into trouble and save money. Deb Reporter just asked if I was going to send out these slides. I am. Diana, oh dear Diana, I can't pronounce your last name, asked if there is a template for a conflict of interest policy in New York. Yes. I mean, there's not a specified form under the law, but I can send you an example of one. So that's not a problem. We could send those out with these slides. And this is being recorded, so you'll be getting the recording as well. All right, so nonprofit board members are protected by immunity laws. Here in New York State, we have specific immunity laws that protect volunteers as long as there's not gross negligence, right? I would say that in any jurisdiction in the country, as long as a board member is seen to be acting in the best interest of the organization and in line with those duties that we talked about, right? Showing up, being prudent, making decisions based on information, that there's little risk from being on the board if trouble arises. You want to make sure that you have appropriate insurance coverage, directors, officers' liability insurance if you join a board, in case the board does get sued. that will make sure that their legal fees are covered. If you work for an institution, well, let me back up here. There are institutions that want their employees to make sure that they tell them when they're going to be on a nonprofit board, and in some type cases, get their permission, right? Big audit firms don't want their employees joining the boards of the nonprofits that they audit, right? They view that as a conflict, for example. Bankers, big banks, investment firms, whether they view it as a conflict or not, they still want to know where their employees are serving as board members. Most of those institutions will also want to make sure that the nonprofit you want to serve on the board of has directors and officers liability insurance. And then finally, again, you're protected by good governance and risk management and being present and taking and asking questions and just ensuring that you have confidence that things are being done because you know who is responsible for what, in what ways. Right. So a little bit about how nonprofit boards work. Right. I mentioned before, you have bylaws, they're an organization's roadmap. So you want to make sure that you take a look at them before you join a board and that your board is in compliance with them. Right. The description of the board and how it does business, tell you how many meetings a year, how people are voted in, voted off, that sort of thing. You want to make sure that the organization's bylaws are current. New York State happens to take them seriously, expects organizations to operate within them, but you want to make sure that when back to the risks of your organization that you're protecting them from, making sure that you know how to do things right when trouble comes will be a big help, making sure your bylaws are up to date. Boards have meetings, generally 3 to 12 times a year. They require a quorum, which is generally a majority of the board of members on the board. So that's another reason why it's important to show up, not only so that you know what's going on, but decisions can't really be made. Votes can't be taken unless there is a quorum. Board meetings are where decisions are made. Budgets are approved, strategies planned, etc. Some boards, if they're big enough, if the organization is big enough, have committees. And when you want to join a board, you're going to want to ask, do you want me to be on we want board members to be on a committee. They can do the work of the board in between board meetings. They may meet monthly, they may not. Some of them could be made up of board members and non-board members. So as an example, there might be a committee that's a fundraising committee that might plan an event, do all of the research for the venue, etc. Think about ticket prices, and then come to the board to get approval, right? So that's the work that they do in between board meetings without having to involve the entire board in that process. Thank you, Malik. Malik just put a source of D&O insurance into the chat. It's an affiliate of the New York Council of Nonprofits, set up specifically to provide insurance for nonprofit organizations. All right. So governance versus management. If you are not joining an organization that's where the board is also the volunteers, but it has professional staff, you're going to want to respect the hierarchy of the board, the staff, volunteers, etc. So the board of directors is the governors, right? We're about strategy. We're about the direction of the organization. We're about adherence to the mission. You hire staff or an executive director to carry out the directions with respect to the mission, right? Run the program, run the day-to-day activities of the organization. That executive director will manage the staff and volunteers. Now, are there shared responsibilities? Yes. For example, the board of directors has a budget. The staff and the board of directors will collaborate on the budget. We'll collaborate on a fundraising plan. When you bring your skills and your responsibilities to the organization, they might call upon you, ask you to opine or help with some things like a marketing plan. Or if you're an attorney, check out a few things in a contract. You won't be asked to be the general counsel, right? And again, and there's nothing wrong if you're a member of the board of directors with having relationships with staff members. In fact, if you join a board of directors, if you're the treasurer on the finance committee, you'll get to know the CFO pretty well. You'll get to know the director of development pretty well as a board member. You may want to get to know some of the program managers and just get into like the programs and stuff. It's just important to remember that board of directors does not supervise, has one employee and that's the executive director. They don't supervise the staff on a day-to-day basis. They can't tell the staff what to do on a day-to-day basis, and they shouldn't be a sounding board for staff wanting to go around the executive director. Focus as a member of the board on strategy, on the big picture, and let your staff run the day-to-day programs. So we're going to do one more thing before we sort of get into how you find a board, which is how nonprofits are funded and fundraising. Mentioned before, one of the big sort of elephants in the room around being in a board is, am I going to be asked to fundraise? Why? What does that mean? So I want to talk a little bit about that. Nonprofits are funded from a variety of different sources, right? And it depends on the type of nonprofit, what model they have. They have government funds, it can be federal, state, local. It's a nonprofit organization, for example, that houses the homeless. There can be large city contracts. Arts organizations get small contracts from their governments. If it's science, it depends on research, et cetera, it can get federal grants. Earned revenue, things like ticket sales for healthcare organizations, it can be insurance. Community-based health organizations get a big portion of their funds from Medicare, from Medicaid. That's earned revenue. And then the third category is private philanthropy. And that's foundations, corporations, and individuals. And that's kind of where the board comes in. So private philanthropy is important to nonprofit organizations because it's generally, let me back up a second. It's important because it allows them to extend the work that they can do outside of that earned revenue, or there's government grants, et cetera. And there are myths that foundations and corporations provide like a big chunk of private philanthropy in the nonprofit world. And as you can see from that chart, we're a very generous nation. It's $485 billion a year that people, foundations, and corporations give to nonprofits. But really only 18.7% comes from foundations. Those are the Ford foundations, the Rockefeller foundations, whatnot. Only 4.3% comes from corporations. And most corporations' philanthropy has to do with employee engagement or with their own marketing agendas. So that leaves money from individuals. And you can see 67.4%, and then that 9.5% from plan giving is through trusts and wills. So well over 70% of our private philanthropy comes from people, from individuals. And why is that important? Well, generally, that is what we call general operating support, right? It is not tagged to something that is a specific program. It's not something tagged to what we already do, right? The other things, revenue, et cetera, generally foundations fund what we already do. Doesn't give us flexibility to plug holes or plan new things. So individual general operating support are among our most precious funds as nonprofits. And how can we identify new individuals? Widen our circle? Well, that's where the board comes in. So when you join a board, you will probably be asked to help with fundraising. Right? Probably won't. They'll ask you to make, they may ask you to make a meaningful gift, to attend the Vela, to attend events, to leverage your resources on behalf of the organization, right? Ask your connections and friends for contributions, host events, help with pro bono assistance, etc. Expect that you should ask when you're thinking about joining a board what that means. Make sure the organization is transparent. In many cases, it can just mean that they would like a meaningful personal contribution from you. And they would like you to know enough about the organization and get passionate enough about it that you feel comfortable talking it up with other organizations, with your friends, people you know, with your corporation. If your organization has an event, a gala, fundraising events, performances, et cetera, they generally want the board to show up for those, to show their leadership, to show their support. Some organizations have what is called a give-get. This is an amount of money that is required from board members when they join the board. This was a really big thing in larger organizations in past decades, somewhat loosened up in recent decades as we recognize that we want diversity on our boards and that large contributions are a barrier to having, subject matter experts and the diversity that we might want. but you do want to know if what the organization expects of you in terms of fundraising. And you should know that they're going to expect you to do something when you join a nonprofit board. All right, let me take a pause there and look, whoops, sorry, at the chat. We're going to go into how you join a nonprofit board. Wondered if anybody has any questions about what we've done so far, because I've been pretty much talking nonstop for half an hour. How are we doing out there, folks? All right. Well, this might not take a minute. Oh, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Amber. All right. Awesome. Okay. Um, Affirmation is good. Thank you, you guys. All right, moving forward, joining a nonprofit board. So when you think about joining a nonprofit board, you want to think about, before you think about what areas interest you and what characteristics interest you. I talked about your fiduciary responsibilities, your fundraising responsibility. The most important thing about joining a nonprofit board is that you're passionate about the work that they do. To get into it, that you think it's important, that you can really feel it, that you're contributing to a cause that you really care about. So think about what kind of causes you do care about, right? Have a list, sample list over there on the left: animal welfare, arts and culture, education. It doesn't have to be one thing. You can care about animals and, homeless people or youth and after school programs or any of those things. But you do want to sort of narrow down before you even start this about what kind of cause will get my juices running and make me feel like I want to show up 4 times a year to board meetings, every month for committee meetings, all of those things. Then you want to think about what characteristics might interest you, right? Every board is different. And so the question is, would you like to join a startup, right? That means rolling up your sleeves, doing some volunteer work. You want something that's grassroots. Back to the earlier question, more advocacy, policy-based, small board, small organization, large established organization that really needs your help. Founder-driven is the third one there. That can be quite cool. In the arts, frequently you'll run into an organization that is founded by someone who wanted to found their own company. Think about Dance Theater of Harlem or Alvin Ailey or any of those people. But when those founders were alive, they had a little bit more to say about the programming of the organization. That would be than organizations that aren't driven by their founders. So it can be inspiring, but it's a different kind of atmosphere. Um, so just back, Sarah just asked, how much do you think, Barry, do you think it's to joining a board if you can't make a significant personal contribution? I don't think it's much of a barrier at all. I think you just need to make a meaningful contribution, right? I mean, there are a few boards out there that have like very large expectations, but I don't know what you mean by significant. But really what we want is we want people to have skin in the game. We want to be one of their priorities as a philanthropy, and we want them to help, get out there and help us find the resources that are necessary. But I wouldn't, if you're not, I wouldn't worry too much if you're not, Richie Rich or any of those things. Most board members are just regular people. Question and answer there. Can a director of an organization get paid if they sit on a board? Hey, yes, they can, but no, they shouldn't. How about that? It's not against, well, in New York State, it is not against the law for a board member to be paid to be on the board, but it's a problem. It's a conflict, right? If you're paid, but you're on the board, then you're working for the organization, but you're also the boss of the employees of the organization. So you're kind of your own boss, and it's kind of a conflict. In addition to which, all that immunity that I talked about, volunteer immunity, well, you don't have that anymore because you're not a volunteer. So I would suggest board members can get reimbursed for their expenses, right? If you buy stuff and you can get reimbursed for that. But we really recommend that board members are not paid for their board service. That being said, as I said, it's not illegal. Okay. So moving on to other things to think about. right? You've thought about the area, you've thought about like how big. You want to remember that when you join a board, you're joining a team of people who work together, and that every board has its own personality and culture. So you want to, during the process of getting to know the organization, get to know the culture a little bit. What is the mission? What's its history? Where is it in its life cycle? And by life cycle, we mean, has it been around a long time? Is it relatively new? Is it, are its services really established? Is it trying to be entrepreneurial and creative? These things are important. You want to make sure that you know, like, how long has the executive director been there? How long has the president been in his or her role, right? How much can I contribute to the organization based on how long have other board members been there? How open are they to my views and ideas? You can find this out by talking to people. You can ask to visit a board meeting yourself. You can, if you can, in some circumstances, ask to join a committee before you join the board. Just try to suss this out, right? Figure out every, team experiences, position, personality, style, all of these come to bear. And so it's really worth thinking about and getting to know the organization well enough to understand these things. Let's talk about the nominating process. All right, sorry. Okay. Charles, I'll get you in a second. Okay. So, nominating process. So every organization should have a process, and it'll be in the bylaws, by which it nominates and elects its board of directors. If it's a membership organization, then you have to be a member of the organization. But most nonprofits that are not membership, well, nonprofits that are not membership organizations have what we call self-perpetuating boards, which mean they vote themselves into office. And so you'll want to be elected by the board. Once you've identified an organization, you'll probably be asked to interview with the executive director, with a bunch of board members, get to know them, make sure you know enough about the organization to say why you're interested and what value you want to add. Make sure that you get to see a site visit. Most arts organizations will want to make sure that you've actually seen performances and that you embrace their art, right? And as part of the process, you'll be interviewed and then eventually go to the nominating or governance committee, right? Get an interview there. They will nominate you to the board, and the board has to vote to approve you. Get to know if you're thinking about joining a board at the process, ask them how long this might take. Some boards can vote on board members at every board meeting. Others vote on them just once a year. Want to know this going in, important. Just get to know the organization as much as you need to. Your valued resource, any organization would be happy to have you on the board. You want to go have this information available to you as you go in. Okay. So, and Charles, I think I'm just going to hold your question to the end if you don't mind. I think it's a really good one, worth taking some time. So, what do you want to know when you're joining a board? What kind of questions? Well, obviously, it's mission, vision, programs. You want to know what its programs are, what its services. It has a strategic plan. What are its goals? What are its challenges going forward? Make sure that the logistics work for you. Do you have to serve on a committee? Which one do they want you to serve on? If you're a finance person, they will think that you want to join on the finance committee. If you don't want to do that, your volunteer work because you do it all day. Please make sure that they know that up front. You know, how often, when, our meetings, etc. What are the fundraising, financial expectations? All of these things it's good to know up front. Again, back to the business model, financial condition of the organization. How much money does it get from government, from earned revenue? What are the risks, right? We had COVID in 2020. All of our arts organizations, which relied heavily on earned income, suddenly didn't have any. It was a big risk, but most of them were aware of it and jumped on that, right? You need to know that. That's a little unusual. But, is there one big government contract? Is there one big individual donor? And then just for yourself, are there terms of office? Are there term limits? What is the stability of the organization? How long has the executive director been there? How long have people been on the board? Is there a founder? Who are the key stakeholders? What are the relationships with those people? And are you dependent on your relationship with your local elected official who makes sure that you get funding every year, but could lose their next election? These are just risks that you want to know going in. And then you want to make sure, are there opportunities for board learning? And that's more like, is the organization going to invest in you as a board member to help you be successful at what you do? And then questions to ask yourself, right? Does the organization interest me? Again, back, it's the schedule work and your skills. Does it match what you want? Are you want to give it? Is this going to be one of my major philanthropic activities? And then do I want to spend more time with the people I've met so far? I think that's really important. I think that what you need to know is, except for like founder-driven arts organizations, if you have a cause that you're passionate about, um, but there are probably more than one organization that does that in your community. Helps the homeless, helps the underserved, has youth programs, etc. So if the board that you're interviewing with doesn't meet the style that you want to be part of, right? If it's too formal, if it's too relaxed, if it's kind of loosey-goosey and they want you to figure things out and that's not your style, you can find another organization that will do what you're interested in. There's no reason to join a board that you're not going to enjoy being on. You can always find one that you will. And again, you'll get these slides. Here are some documents that you might want to review. Going in, again, that IRS 990, that's the one that everyone has to file. It's available in New York here on the Charities Bureau. That's the Attorney General Charities Bureau. But GuideStar, ProPublica, IRS, just Google your organization and 990. And then there's some other financial statements, other statements that you might want to look at, including if there's an audit. If the organization is small, it might not need an audit, might just have regular financials, the budget, that sort of thing. Make sure that they have a DEI policy, make sure that you understand what they want from you as a board member. These are all important things to know going in. Right. Okay. I think I just answered that question. I hope I did. Okay. All right. So circling it on the end here, how are you going to find this nonprofit board? You know what you want. You're up for the challenge. You have the time. Well, first tell people, right? Have a 2-minute elevator pitch. Nonprofit boards nonprofits constantly looking for new board members, but they're not going to, they're shy about asking people. People who are on the board don't always know what they should say, etc. So you can just go out there and say, makes people know, put it on your LinkedIn. I'm really interested in joining the nonprofit board, right? I want to volunteer for an organization an organization whose work you might want to support, right? There's a volunteer board section in LinkedIn. Take a look at that. Idealist has some occasionally as well. Follow a nonprofit that you're interested in on Facebook. They sometimes post board positions there. We've been encouraging people to get out there on social media. Part of what this is about is so many boards are made up of board members who know each other, who met each other through their own personal connections, etc. And that's a real barrier to sort of diversity of opinion and skill set and all of those things that boards really need to be able to make the best decisions. So we've been encouraging organizations to just get out there on Facebook, on their websites, say that they're looking for board members. So take a look at Facebook and LinkedIn and see what organizations you're interested in. And then finally, this is our website. So this is a matching platform. It's kind of like a match.com. You can see down there, you go down to the left, you can register as a board candidate or as a nonprofit looking for board members. This was founded primarily in New York about 25 years ago. At this point, there aren't any barriers to entry, so there are actually board positions and candidates all over the country. Uh, it is free to register. It is free for you as a board candidate to get out and search for a board. Don't be shy. Uh, Board organizations can search for you, and there's an algorithm that can pair candidates with organizations that match in skills and interest. But really, the best way to find a board is to be proactive about it, to get out, search, reach out, say, hey, I want to be a board member. Um, Frankly, we are all interested in people who are interested in us and the causes that we serve. So most boards will be happy to hear from you and happy that you want to help them further their mission and the good that they do in the world. And with that, that is my presentation. Are there other questions? So back to Charles, who asked the difference between small boards and larger established boards. What would that look like to us? Well, first off, I would say it's the number of people who are on the board, obviously. Also, the size of the organization, right? A smaller organization, say with a budget under like $5 million, is probably not going to have what we would think of as, a board of 22 people who've been involved forever, et cetera, though they might. I think a larger established, what we mean by that is there's been continuity on the board. There's been some turnover, but there's succession planning. There's a strategy for the board for how are they going to replace people who roll off? How are they going to encourage people to join in their leadership, right? I think that really makes a more established board than some of the smaller, scrappier organizations. Hope that answers your question. Okay, what do we got next? Can you provide examples of board learning? Sure. Help us understand, training in nonprofit financial management would be one. Regular, like what we do now, an annual refresher in what are our responsibilities as a board. Perhaps a training in board recruitment would be useful. Not to plug our services, but the New York Council of Nonprofits, which is serves nonprofits in New York, has like tons of webinars for board members that it's great. If I'm on a board, I encourage my board members to take that all the time. We sometimes go through one or two at a board meeting, right? Recruiting, what is the recruiting cycle? What does diversity in recruiting mean for a board? Training on what the organization does, right? We recently got, the board that I'm on serves individuals and families who are impacted by the opioid epidemic. So what are trends? What are new trends and services for this population? What are new trends in finding this for this population? Right? A lot of mental health issues, a lot of new money for mental health. Should board members pay for board insurance? No, that's the responsibility of the organization. The organization has D&O insurance. Individual board members do not. Daniel, are there board fairs in New York City? Not that I know of, not since COVID. In fact, nationally, there was an organization called the Board Match that had a big fair in New York every year. And with COVID, it went out of business. If you look to your alma mater, if you graduated from college, that they have board fairs occasionally. Harvard does, for example. Columbia, I know. We do work with Baruch and with CUNY, but I don't know of anything that is sort of an established board fair that's taken over from that one that was pretty established before COVID. Any best practices of note for board, standard board terms or board of director officer terms in New York State? Well, New York State law doesn't really have much to say about that. We always say, so we like 3-year board terms and then, staggered so that a third of the board comes up for election every year. It's a best practice to ask people to limit the number of terms and then take a break so that you can get some new blood in and recruit new people. As a practical matter, it's hard to let go a board member who's a really good board member. So not all organizations that have board term limits actually enforce them. But I think it's a really good question to ask as you're interviewing, uh, oh, thank you, George. How long have board members been on this board? How long have the officers been, right? You want to know, make sure that there's opportunities for you to join the leadership. George Ferrari asks, ask if there are any pending legal cases or if they anticipate anything in that area. Ask if there's a CEO succession plan. Oh, a crisis communication plan. I like to know these things. Thank you, George. I'll add those to the list. I think that's great. I think that's really, really great. Um, Crisis communications, yes. That's very interesting. I think, yeah, asked about training. We do training around succession planning all the time. It's not that common. It's a really important thing to do that. You never know when your CEO is going to have a better opportunity, and suddenly you're going to have to look for someone. Any other questions? All right. Well, I guess we can end about 5 minutes early. Thank you all for joining us. You will get these slides. You will get this recording. You will see that my contact information is on the front of the slides. So please reach out with any questions. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you, everyone. And again, get out there, register on the platform, think about what kind of board you want to join. You know, uh, Organizations, boards are really challenged to find great board members who can show up, who can do the work, who understand what their responsibilities are. And it's a very rewarding way to give back to your community. And it's also just an amazing way to learn about your community and the people who you live with. So thank you very much, everybody. Very much appreciate your time here. And with that, I think we'll sign off. Enjoy the rest of your day.